Thank you, Clerk, and welcome to meeting number 7 of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development.
From the House on April 20th, 2020 and September 30th, 2020, as well as the order of reference of the committee on October 13, 2020, the committee is meeting to resume consideration of votes 1, 5, 10, 15, 20, L25 and L30 under Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Vote 1 under International Development Research Centre, and Vote 1 under International Joint Commission Canadian section. To ensure an orderly meeting, as always, I would encourage participants to mute their microphones when they're not speaking and address comments through the chair. When you have 30 seconds remaining in your questioning time, I will signal you with this yellow sheet of paper. Interpretation is available through the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. Maintenant, j'aimerais présenter notre...
And now I'd like to introduce our team of witnesses. First of all, we've got the Honourable François-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Welcome to you, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you. And also his team, we've got Martha Morgan, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Annick Ouellette, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Financial Officer, Corporate Planning, Finance and Information Technology. Then we have Alyssa Goldberg, Assistant Deputy Minister.
And Bruce Christie, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Trade Policy and Negotiations. Avec ça, Monsieur le Ministre.
So now I'd like to give you the floor for your opening comments. Thank you very much, Chair. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate
election as Chair. It's great to have you there as someone who knows well the world. Monsieur le Président,
members of the committee, thank you for this invitation to appear before the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. As you have done, I would also like to thank the officials who are accompanying me and all of the diplomats in Ottawa and abroad who are serving Canadians proudly and in a professional way. My last appearance, Chairman, before the committee dates back to the 12th of March, the day after the day when the WHO declared COVID-19 as a pandemic, and since then the virus has exacerbated international instability and intensified trends that are leading to an erosion of the world order.
Challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic is still causing loss of lives and uncertainty across the globe. Rapid change and ever-increasing humanitarian needs are challenging and pressuring the international system. Disregard of international law, including human rights, combined with the lack of accountability, is threatening the rules-based international order, and the world is still faced with the ever-evolving fundamental threat of climate change. With these great challenges come great responsibilities, and Canada is willing and ready to do its part and to lead. This is why we have been deeply engaged with our partners and friends around the world to develop solutions that work to the benefit of all and advance Canada's interests and values. In March, it was difficult for all of us to imagine that in a matter of days, Canada would undertake the repatriation of tens of thousands of Canadians from every corner of the globe, the largest such operation in Canada's history in peacetime. And there, Mr. Chair, I think I can speak on behalf of all parliamentarians. The work that has been done by our diplomats around the world and our staff here in Ottawa is just extraordinary. People have spent countless hours to help Canadians. This was one of the best times. Everyone worked hard, but I think Canadians are grateful to have the diplomats in time of great need. But we must not forget that beyond our borders, COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted the world's most vulnerable populations and exacerbated inequality. As you heard from my colleague, Minister Gould, last week, that is why we have been working to alleviate suffering through humanitarian relief. This is not only the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do. Much is still unknown about this virus, but what we know for certain is that no one will be safe from the pandemic until everyone is safe. Let me move on to our feminist foreign policy. We also need to ensure that our institutions work for everyone. A free press is essential to the protection of human rights, democracy, and good governance. That is why I was so proud to co-host the 2020 Media Freedom Conference with Botswana just a few days ago. Our feminist approach to foreign affairs also means promoting rights-based, open, and inclusive societies where all people, regardless of their background or identities, can fully benefit from equal and meaningful participation in economic, political, social, and cultural life. Canadian knows that this is the only way to build a safer and more prosperous world. We cannot take the rights of women for granted. In too many places around the world, women still find themselves fighting for their basic human rights. Just a few weeks ago, we celebrated the 20th anniversary of Resolution 1325 at the United Nations. Canada is proud to support and advance the women, peace, and security agenda hand in hand with dedicated actors from around the world. Our feminist foreign policy white paper will anchor our core foreign policy conviction that all people should enjoy the same human rights and the same opportunities to succeed and fulfill their potential. As Canadians, we have always understood that our influence is greatest when we work closely with our partners. Canada sits at the table of the world's most important international institution, whether it's the G7, the G20, NATO, the OECD, the OSCE, la Francophonie, or the Commonwealth. In all of those fora, we are resolved to advance Canadian values and interests while bringing about a more just and equitable world. Now let me turn to the United States. We all know that Canada and the United States enjoy a truly unique relationship. Our shared geography, strong economic ties, and deep personal connections have made us friends, partners, and the closest of allies. Just as we work with the current administration in Mexico to renew the free trade agreement, we look forward to working closely with the new administration to tackle the major challenge of the day, like keeping people safe throughout the pandemic, advancing peace and prosperity, and fighting climate change together. Let me move on to China. Our relationship with China is a complex and multidimensional one, not just for Canada, but for democracies around the world. Our approach is to be firm.
Notre approche, c'est d'être ferme et futé. Avec la Chine, nous nous guiderons, nous nous fonderons sur nos intérêts, nos valeurs et nos principes, y compris les droits de la personne, ainsi que les règles à l'international et les partenaires stratégiques. Nous allons aborder les droits de la personne avec la Chine et nous allons collaborer sur des enjeux globaux comme les changements climatiques. Il n'y a pas de solution sans la Chine. Alors, soyons clairs, la santé et la sécurité des Canadiens ici et à l'étranger seront toujours au cœur de notre approche. Presque 2 ans se sont écoulés depuis la détention arbitraire de Michael Kovrig et Michael Spavor. Nous continuons à demander leur libération. J'aimerais souligner la résilience et le soutien des familles à chaque étape. Après plusieurs mois, nous avons finalement obtenu l'accès virtuel à des services consulaires pour messieurs Kovrig et Spavor.
Order.
Yeah, sorry. I'm really sorry, Minister. There's something wrong with the interpretation. It's coming out as French while he's speaking French.
Okay, Madam Clerk, can we have a quick look
French.
and see if that's something that's quickly solvable?
I'll try to improve my French, Ruby. It's coming French when I speak French. But Mr. Chair, I'm at your disposal.
Let's hear from the IT technicians for a moment to see if that's something that can be. Should we just try to see if
Mr. Chair,
it's
it
working
should be good to go.
Okay, Minister, please, let's see if it's working now. Please continue.
Okay. I think I was saying after many months, we recently secured on-site virtual consular access to Mr. Kovrig and Mr. Spavor. This is something I had personally raised in a meeting with my counterpart, State Councillor Wang Yi in Rome in August of this year, and on which we worked tirelessly. Comme beaucoup de Canadiens, nous
As with many Canadians, we're alarmed by the reports that speak of gross violations of human rights in Xinjiang. And I have directly taken this up with my Canadian counterpart recently in Rome this summer when there was a meeting that was arranged at my request.
Raised directly with Michelle Bachelet, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. The concerns we have are shared by many around the world. Multilateralism is key to ensuring global stability and security in a world in which China is a powerful actor. This is why we are working with like-minded countries to defend the rules-based international order and ensure China abides by its international obligations. We are committed to developing new international frameworks and conventions that respond to today's challenges. One example is the successful conclusion of talks for the Canada-United Kingdom Trade Continuity Agreement, which was led by my very able colleague, Minister Ng. This agreement will provide stability and predictability for businesses, exporters, workers in Canada and in the United Kingdom. The pandemic highlights the importance of ensuring that supply chains remain open and that air travel is not altered for essential goods and services. Canada is also committed to strengthening the world institutions in order to strengthen global stability and respond to emerging threats. We have continued to engage partners and allies on the critical situation in Venezuela through our work in the Lima Group and continued high-level engagement with President Guaido. Over the last several months, we have also witnessed the eruption of multiple political crises around the world. I will not be able to name all of them, but let me mention several situations of concern. In Lebanon, in the wake of August's tragedy in Beirut, Canada immediately provided $30 million of humanitarian aid and I personally traveled there. We continue to follow very closely the situation on the ground, and we will continue to support the Lebanese people in the months to come. When it comes to Belarus, we have rejected the results of the fraudulent presidential election in Belarus and continue to call for free and fair elections. Alongside allies, we have imposed 3 sets of sanctions against government officials of Belarus and urged the government of Belarus to find a negotiated solution that respects the will of the people. Now let me move to Nagorno-Karabakh. Nous continuons de travailler avec.
We are continuing to work with our allies and also the Minsk Group of the OSCE to find a lasting solution.
I've been briefed by my department official on the region and on export permits. As you know, we have suspended a number of export permits to Turkey following the allegations that equipment sold by a Canadian company is being used in Nagorno-Karabakh. The export permits have been suspended in line with Canada's robust export control regime, which is one of the world's more rigorous. We will continue to carefully scrutinize export permits to ensure that they are consistent with our legal obligations and the protection of human rights and international humanitarian law. Now let me move a bit further east to Hong Kong, où nous avons été les premiers.
We were the first ones to suspend our extradition treaty with Hong Kong, and we announced a series of other measures in response to China's imposition of the national security law on Hong Kong.
Chair, let me turn to the tragedy of PS 752. As we get close to the first anniversary of the downing, our thoughts remain with the families and friends of the victims. Our commitments to supporting the families of the victim to get all the answer they deserve is a priority for me and our government. To that end, we continue to stand firm for the transparency, accountability, justice, and reparation for the families of the victim. We also continue to lead the work of the International Coordination Group, which Canada founded and which includes the UK, Ukraine, Sweden, and Afghanistan. We will not rest until we see justice served and those responsible held to account. In conclusion, the events of 2020 have demonstrated the importance of Canada's foreign policy. Today, COVID-19 shows us that our fate is deeply intertwined with that of the community of nations. Tomorrow, we know that the defining challenges of our time will only be solved through collective action on a scale never witnessed before. As some country turns away from the world and retreat to nationalist self-interest, we instead hold on to a different belief, a conviction that cooperation, partnership, and multilateralism will carry the day. These beliefs have always underpinned Canada's relationship to the world, and they will be guiding us as we face the challenges in the months and years to come and work to reform and strengthen the international order for generations to follow, to ensure security, stability, and prosperity for all. Mr. Chair, I'll be happy to take your question, but if I may just have a technical issue, if you allow me just 30 seconds to solve a technical issue at our end, we'll be ready to go.
Sure, please do. And our first round of questions will go to Mr. Chong. Mr. Chong, if we can ask you to stand by for 30 seconds to address that issue, and then we will turn it right over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How much time do I have on my opening round?
You have 6 minutes in your opening round.
Thank you.
Est-ce que ça va, Monsieur le Ministre?
Oui, on avait.
Is it okay for you now, Minister? Yes, we just did some background noise.
Okay.
We're fixing that now, and we will be duly ready to go. But I think we can start.
Perfect. Mr. Chong, the floor is yours for 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for appearing in front of our committee. Minister, congratulations on the Canada-United Kingdom trade agreement. We look forward to reviewing that text in greater detail. But I'd like to ask you about Canada-China relations, specifically with respect to Hong Kong. As you know, Minister, Commonwealth judges sit on Hong Kong's top court, including a Canadian judge. It's been reported today that Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said yesterday that the UK is considering pulling its judges out of Hong Kong's highest court in response to China's violation of international law in Hong Kong, including the expulsion of duly elected legislators in the Legislative Council, the silencing of dissent, and many other violations of law. Dominic Raab said that he has begun consultations with Lord Reid, President of the United Kingdom Supreme Court, about whether or not it is appropriate for British judges to sit as non-permanent members of the Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal. As you know, in 2018, 2 years ago, the Honourable Beverley McLachlin was appointed to the Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal, the first Canadian jurist to be nominated to the post. My question is this: are you undertaking consultations with respect to the Honourable Beverley McLachlin?
Well, I'd like, Mr. Chair, to thank the Honourable Michael Chong for the question, because that's an issue that I've discussed with our, it's part of the number of discussions we have with our UK counterparts. And with respect to that, I would say, Mr. Chong, I am well aware of the issue. This is an issue that has been discussed and views have been expressed. I have all the belief that Mrs. McLachlin will make her own judgment and will take the right decision when it comes to her role on the court in Hong Kong.
Are you consulting at all with any Canadian jurists on this issue?
We have been discussing this issue, I would say, mainly on a bilateral basis. As we discuss all issues with Hong Kong, I think what people need to know is that all the steps that you have seen, Canada and the UK have been in lockstep. I don't think there's one step that has been taken which has not been in consultation between Canada and the United Kingdom. That's, I think, what you would expect from us, and these consultations will be ongoing.
Thank you. As you know, Australian Judge James Spiegelman resigned from the High Court in September, citing concerns over the national security law imposed on the region by Beijing. So this is not just of concern to the United Kingdom. I'd like to move on to a second issue, which is Air Canada and China. As you know, Canada's airlines are failing. WestJet and Air Canada have laid off 30,000 people and are losing tens of millions of dollars a day. The government has yet to come forward with an aid package. The majority of our G7 allies, France, Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom, and the United States, have created financial relief packages for their airline sectors. There are 12 flights a week from Chinese carriers into Canada. There are only 2 flights a week from Canadian air carriers, specifically Air Canada, into China. And so we are facing an unbalanced approach and a lack of reciprocity in the relationship. When our allies have faced the same situation, they took action. The France and Germany faced a similar situation, and they took diplomatic action to ensure the reciprocity of flights in both directions in order to protect their air carriers. The United States took action under the treaty and under regulation to effect similar action to protect their air carriers. What is the Canadian government doing to protect Air Canada and ensure that there is a balance in the relationship and ensuring that Air Canada has a fighting chance of survival?
Well, thank you again for the question. I can assure Mr. Chong, having done contributed to the repatriation of probably more than 100,000 Canadians on 500 flights, I probably spoke to the CEO of Air Canada more often than many people would imagine. And so we are in close contact. I've always lended myself with the Minister of Transport to support, whether it's Air Canada, WestJet, or anyone of our airlines in Canada. We fly internationally, and we'll continue to do so. So if there was a specific request, we would certainly do so. I think there's
the request by Air Canada is for the Canadian government to take diplomatic action to address this imbalance. There are only 2 Air Canada flights a week from Canada to China. We are allowing 12 flights a week from China into Canada. There's a lack of reciprocity here, and it's hurting Air Canada's bottom line, and they're losing tens of millions of dollars a day. They're asking for what has been done in places like France, Germany, and the United States, where their governments insisted on reciprocity, that if China is going to have 12 flights a week coming into Canada, that there should be 12 flights a week by Air Canada to China.
Well,
what actions is your government taking on that?
I will be fighting at every step of the way, but I've not received any such requests, and I speak to the CEO of Air Canada almost on a weekly basis.
Well, Air Canada, you ought to talk to your
CEO. I speak to the CEO, and the CEO has not made that request to me. I spoke to him just last week.
Okay.
You can ask him, but if I have a question from Air Canada,
they have requested that of your. They have requested that of your government. So I suggest maybe you talk to your colleagues. One quick final question.
Sure.
Is Canada continuing to pursue a trade and services agreement with Hong Kong?
Not at this time.
Thank you,
Mr. Chong,
Mr. Chair.
thank you very much, Minister. Thank you. We'll have to leave it there. The next round goes to Mr. Fonseca again for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. Minister, we here in Canada are so proud of our multiculturalism, and in my riding of Mississauga East Cooksville, we have a large Ukrainian diaspora community, and as you know, this upcoming Friday, the 27th, is Holodomor Memorial Day. In March, you had the opportunity to visit Ukraine, and I'd like you to update our committee on the bilateral relations that Canada has with this region, with the country of Ukraine. State how Canada is working with the Minister of National Defence to ensure that any deployment of Canadian Armed Forces aligns with Canada's national interests, such as Operation Unifier in the Ukraine. If you can update us.
Well, thank you for the question, and I'm happy that you mentioned that, because I think the relationship between Canada and Ukraine has never been as good. As you suggested and as you mentioned, our relationship is deep in people-to-people ties. I think we have more than 1 million Canadian of Ukrainian origin, and I was very proud to be one of the first to be in Ukraine. Actually, I'm probably one of the very few ministers who met 2 foreign ministers within 24 hours, because I was there when the previous minister was there, and then the morning after there was another minister. So we have a very, very close collaboration, not only in our bilateral relationship, and you did mention that when it comes to training of police force, when it comes to military presence, I think there's never been a better time for all of us to show solidarity with the people of Ukraine in their reform. I must say, I've been talking to the foreign minister of Ukraine. I think now we do what we call text diplomacy. So we've been texting each other regularly. And as you know, Ukraine is a key partner when it comes to fighting for the families of the victims of PS752. So we have been in close cooperation. We're going to continue to be working, helping in the reform, maintaining our presence in Ukraine, which is very meaningful, and maintaining also the financial assistance that has been provided over a long time to Ukraine. I think Ukraine is at the forefront of fighting for democracy, for liberty, and for freedom, and we need to support them. And you can rest assured, Mr. Fonseca, and all your constituents of Ukrainian origin, and for that matter, all Canadians, we're going to step and we're going to be there and defend and speak up. And I think we'll continue to be the very close partner that we have shown since the beginning.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, I understand that there is a COVID-19 Foreign Ministers Committee or working group. And on these international efforts, what are we seeing in terms of combating of COVID-19 pandemic globally? And how does Canada's response rank amongst our other G7 and G20 countries? And if you could tell me some more about this COVID-19 Foreign Ministers Committee or working group.
Well, thank you for asking the question. You know, it started from a very simple idea when COVID ate all of us. Many were asking, how can we do better? How can we coordinate? How can we come together? And it's a very simple thing. I took basically my Rolodex and invited about 15 to 20 of our colleagues around the world to join a call, which we had in the height of the COVID pandemic, almost, I think, was weekly. And I have called that. It's a good portion of the G20 countries, but other countries like Morocco, like Peru, where you will recall when we were trying to repatriate, we had a lot of issues. So I invited a number of countries, and it was extremely beneficial. Actually, it's continuing. We had 13 calls. This is one of the example Canada leading in the world. We've not talked much about, but we've done a lot of work when it comes to transit hub, when it's come to air bridges. You may recall that I said we need to maintain, to Mr. Chong's point, air bridges, because at the beginning of the pandemic, I was saying there was a risk, as we've seen during the last war, that we were losing some air bridges, connectivity between Canada and Europe and other region. We talk about supply chain, and we talk about what can we do together to alleviate and to make sure that we were sharing best practice. And it's really amazing because it's one of the groups where there's no prepared statements. It lasts for an hour. Canada's chairing, and who can come. And it's been with countries which have been, whether it's France, whether it's Germany, we had India recently join. We had country like Brazil. We had country like South Korea, Singapore, a number of countries which just came together. Italy comes to mind to just want to share best practices and make sure that we were creating an informal forum for foreign ministers to coordinate the response on COVID-19.
So, Minister, COVID-19 has been a challenge for countries all over the world. And but what unique challenges have your global counterparts reported, and how's Canada seen on that global scale in terms of our response to the pandemic?
Well, you know, from the beginning of the pandemic, the Prime Minister and I wanted to make sure that the voice of the most vulnerable would be amplified. And I can think, for example, of our Caribbean colleagues, where when the pandemic hit, you can imagine, so 3 sources of revenue, whether it's tourism, whether it's remittances, whether it's natural resources, all the 3 have gone down. So what started as a health crisis could easily turn into a financial crisis or a food crisis in some part of the world, which could lead to humanitarian crisis. So that's why we have invested, and that's why we have been present, whether it's in Latin America, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in the Caribbean, to help our closest friends to make sure that they can go through this pandemic. And I think Canada has shown to be a very trustworthy and reliable partner.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Fonseca. Maintenant, la parole est à Monsieur Bergeron.
And now, Mr. Bergeron, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair and Minister. It's a pleasure to see you almost less than 24 hours again in front of another parliamentary committee. It's very generous of you, and we very much appreciate your presence. I'd like to talk about a subject which is keeping us busy in the members of this committee, because it's part of the study that we're going to undertake, namely the impact of the pandemic on a certain number of vulnerable populations throughout the world, and the role of the World Health Organization to prevent this pandemic and other possible pandemics that have already been flagged up by the WHO. So my first question is, do you have the impression that the WHO has played its role correctly to adequately avert the international community about the danger that was lurking there for us? And do you think that we need to readjust certain points in the light of information that has shown that the WHO is undergoing undue pressure, for example, from the People's Republic of China. First of all, thank you, Mr. Bergeron, for your question and the fact that the committee is looking at this. Of course, the WHO could have done better. When we see the millions of people who've been affected by the virus throughout the world, I think that we have to be clear that the organisation should have done better. And that is why Canada has joined together with various other countries and has said the WHO is doing important work, of course, during the pandemic. But when the time comes, we will need to put questions about leadership and also about the funding. And yes, we'll need to put questions about the various early warning systems that should be set up, because as you have correctly said, we need to get prepared for the next pandemic. And we could have done things better. And humanity has to be better prepared. And I mentioned this when I met with the Director General of the WHO. And this is certainly something that Canada, together with other countries, is going to continue to push forward so that we're better prepared for next time round. Now, one of the things that we have observed during this health crisis, which broke out several months ago, is the fact that all of the solidarity mechanisms that had been established on the international scene all basically failed. We've seen this, for example, within the European Union and also with the World Health Organization, even although the states, in fact, were actually competing to gain the few resources that were available to face up to the pandemic. So if you started to think about what needs to be set up in the future to ensure that these solidarity-based mechanisms at an international level are not thrown overboard when another pandemic arises. Because, as I've said, the WHO has already warned us about the possibility of future pandemics. And I imagine that we don't want to be caught with our pants down the next time, as has been the case this time round. Yes, I quite agree with you. That is why Canada, together with other countries, has launched discussions about the reforms that we need. And there's an investigation underway, as you know, on the causes behind COVID-19. But generally speaking, when I was referring to the COVID-19 committee within the Foreign Affairs Ministers, it's basically drawing the spread that you've mentioned, Mr. Bergeron. Given that there was a certain absence of a group of ministers or an established organisation actually consulting, then we actually decided to step in to the breach and organise this type of consultation, and great things have come out of that. So I think that is a wonderful example to show that we've done something spontaneously. Perhaps we'll be able to create this COVID-19 Foreign Affairs Minister and put it on a more permanent footing. I would like that to be the case. I've already mentioned that, because we need to be well prepared. If it's not a pandemic, it'd be something else that would come up. But as you said, it's quite clear that we have to work with existing groups and the existing organisations, and there has been a gap there, and that is why we have shown leadership and said that we need to do things better and coordinate together, because that's what the world really needed. Effectively, yes, I think we can all see that there really was not coordination. There was a lack of coordination. We certainly need to do better next time round. Coming on now to the funding of the WHO, first of all. Do you believe that the election of a new administration in Washington may call into question the decision that was taken by the Trump administration to withdraw from the WHO, first of all? And then secondly, do you believe that the US may decide to stay outside of the WHO? If that is the case, what should the international community do to try and offset the absence of this important player within the ranks of the WHO? Now, Mr. Bergeron, of course, I cannot speak on behalf of the new Biden administration, because what I've heard and read, like yourselves, is that there's a great will to relaunch multilateralism. and to have more cohesion of this sort. We were talking about having a summit of democracies. That's what I've read. So I think there is will to do more together. And that's great because Canada is fully in favour of this. We know that multilateralism is important for Canada, but it's also important for all of the nations. For example, when it comes to the question of the vaccine, that is why we have participated in the COVAX facility together with others to ensure, as I've said in my speech, that we will be safe here when everyone's safe. And so we need to work within the framework of the WHO, but perhaps also within other fora. But Canada wants to be in the front lines of all of this because we realise that the well-being of Canadians will depend on the global response to COVID-19. Thank you very much, the Minister, and thank you very much to Mr. Bergeron. And now, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minister, for joining us again today. I was at the Canada-China Committee meeting last night, and I probably won't ask very much about China today because we have so many more important, not a more important, but many other variety of issues that are important for us to discuss today. You mentioned, of course, the activity of your department in repatriating Canadians, and I think that was a success story for Canada and for the officials and your government, and of course with the cooperation of yourself and the parliamentary secretary particularly. I want to compliment you for that effort. A lot of people's lives were helped by that. So thank you for that. I want to ask first of all about the most recent international crisis, that between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which has been resulted at least in a ceasefire and a potential settlement and resolution of these long-standing issues between the two parties. I will ask you though, one of the issues that came up was the failure, or the lack rather, of any real knowledge of what was going on with these in this situation and in these two countries because of Canada's lack of a mission in either Armenia or in Azerbaijan. Armenia being looked after through Moscow and Azerbaijan through Ankara in Turkey. And I'm wondering, is Canada prepared to revisit that and ensure that it can actually play some positive role on the ground in assisting these parties to resolve some of the major outstanding issues that still arise as a result of the ceasefire?
Well, thank you for the very thoughtful question, Mr. Harris. And yes, we spent a bit of time yesterday on China. And thank you for your good words for our diplomats around the world, which hopefully your message will be conveyed to them to thank them for the repatriation, which was really all of us became a consular officer, I can tell you. To your question about Nagorno-Karabakh, Mr. Harris, you know that I've spent an enormous amount of time. This is a tragedy. I've been in touch with the Armenian community on the numerous occasions. To your point about information, I feel that I've been very much informed about what's going on. I think I spoke every other day with the foreign minister of Armenia. We texted almost every day about the situation. You know that I went in a visit about security in Europe. I met with the OSCE leadership. I met with the ambassador of France, the ambassador of the United States to OSCE. I also went to meet NATO, and I met with the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and colleagues in the region. So I would say yes to your question. We're always looking at our posture in different countries, how we can make sure that we have the more appropriate network to cover all areas. You know, we have a number of missions around the world. But certainly in terms of information, I would just say to the Canadian Canadians, I think I was pretty much on top of what was going on.
That's not my particular concern. I mean, obviously being there on the ground, you on an ongoing basis, our diplomats and our people would know more, but we'd also be in a position to help assist the parties if that was possible. So the Minsk group, as part of the OSCE, which we are members of, was a notable lack of success over the 16 or 20 years plus that it was involved in trying to resolve this dispute. By being there, you would have perhaps a role to play in assisting the parties to work together. That was a point of my question. I'll leave you to answer that another time. The other issue where we are perhaps lacking in support on the ground is in Africa. Over the course of the previous government's regime, a number of embassies were closed and missions closed. You mentioned last night the great role that China is playing in terms of having relationships with many countries in Africa. What is Canada doing to revive its presence in Africa to maintain its connections with the African nations?
Well, thank you for the question again, Mr. Harris. As you know, Africa is close to my heart. I think that was my first official trip was in Africa. I think it was with the ASEAN Forum, and then I went to Senegal, went to Ethiopia, I went to Mali to talk about the MINUSMA and our troops there. So for me, Africa is very important. I think if you look at, oftentimes I say demography is destiny. If you look at the demographic trend in Africa, clearly it is a place where Canada has a special role to play in my view. We have deep historical relationship. And you know that many times I've been saying that we should be looking also at the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is something that I've been talking. I spoke, I would say, almost regularly to the president of the African Union and a number of foreign ministers in Africa. So in terms of our posture, like I said, Mr. Harris, we are always looking at ways how we can complement our posture in Africa. I think the future is certainly very much in Africa, and our presence is significant to make sure we can promote Canadian interests and values and principles.
Can you tell me why Canada, I know you're not the Minister for International Development, but as Foreign Minister, it's obviously very important to our position in the world. Why is Canada so persistently low in terms of its official international development aid, worse now than under the Harper years on a per capita basis and a percentage of GDP? So why is that, and what are we going to do about it?
Mr. Harris, I'm sorry, we'll have to leave it there. Maybe there's a chance to return to that question in a subsequent round. We will now go to round number 2, and the first 5 minutes of this round go to Mr. Diot.
Thank you, and thanks to the Minister for being here. Minister, in October, Russia used a chemical weapon to poison opposition leader Alexei Navalny, and my colleague raised it in the House, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak about it today. Just wondering if Canada will join our allies and impose the Magnitsky sanctions on the government officials responsible for poisoning the opposition leader.
Well, I would say, Mr. Diot, thank you for asking that question. You probably remember that Canada was one of the countries with Germany that asked for a G7 statement very strongly when Novichok was used, and certainly have been at the forefront. You know as well that we're looking to amend the chemical weapons treaty to make sure that Novichok will be part of that. And we will continue. I think our colleagues in Germany have said they don't want to make that a bilateral issue. They want that to be a multilateral issue. I think we should all be concerned. It is abhorrent to see that states would be using chemical weapons against civilians. And that's why at the time, in conjunction with our German colleague, I did call for the G7 to stand up and speak up, which we did. And you've seen, I think this is one of the things that you've seen throughout the year is Canada doing a bit more consistently, whether with the European Union, whether with the G7, whether with the Five Eyes, and certainly will continue to do so to speak with one strong voice when we see egregious violations of international law like that.
Thanks for that. It was interesting in your opening remarks, you talked about the free press being essential to a free society. And I appreciate that because I was a journalist for 30 years myself. But increasingly, we're seeing the threat against free society and freedom of information coming from big tech companies via the internet, whether it's search engine results or outright blocking news stories. I think there's been a lot of discussion about that and a lot of potential for foreign interference in elections, et cetera, et cetera. So what's Canada doing to fight against that threat?
Well, thank you for that. And I think I would agree with you that democracy and its values and its processes and institutions are under threat in many, many parts of the world. And that's why with the United Kingdom, you see that we were there for the Media Freedom Conference, which we're co-chair. And I can tell you, Mr. Diot, the issue of state and non-state actor interference in our democratic societies with information, disinformation, and infodemic, and however you want to call it, cyber threat, it is always top of mind when I talk to my colleagues. It's clearly top of mind when I talk at the Five Eyes. We talk with colleagues in Europe as well. And I would say Canada is very much engaged. You remember the G7 mechanism that was put in place in Charlevoix, a quick response mechanism to deal with that. And we're looking with the Baltic countries. As you know, there's a NATO center. There's a number of things being looked at to make sure that we can face that threat together. That's also something that NATO is looking at because we know that the work you did before is essential to maintain democracy.
And I appreciate that answer. But again, the threat is not so much coming from secret actors. It's very much out in the open. And it's the power of the tech giants, who some officials and some critics seem to say maybe it's time to break them up because they have too much power. Is that something that Canada would consider pushing for?
Well, I think as part of international discussions, they're different. You referred to the big tech companies, and I think at the OECD, as you know, there's a number of discussions going on with respect to taxation of digital giant. There's other, I would say, discussions that are going on in the world. What I was referring to is the ones also that we're very much concerned, as you've seen, and even CSC in Canada has been referring to that in its latest reports when it singled out Russia, for example. And this is a threat that we take very, very seriously. And if you have this committee a study to do, I'd certainly be willing to listen to you and your colleagues on that.
Just a very quick question. Congrats on getting so many people back when they were forced to come back, obviously, in the pandemic. I did have a lot of trouble trying to get through to Global Affairs at one point, and I'm just wondering what you'd do to prevent that from happening if we came to a situation where it's come on back to Canada, we've got another lockdown.
Just a very brief answer, please, Minister.
Yeah, well, I just say I apologize if you had trouble. As you know, we staffed our watch center. I think at peak we had 600 people. In normal times, I think it's about 10. We had about 2 million email and 1 million phone calls, or the reverse. I can't remember which one we got most, but just to say the volumes we had, Mr. Diot, was unprecedented. But the good thing we learned from that, and we trained many more consular officials, and with the deputy, which has been doing an amazing job, I think if it ever comes to that again, we have trained far more employees of Global Affairs to all jump in to be consular officials to provide the best possible service to Canadians.
Thank you so much, Minister. Next, Ms. De Bruzen for 5 minutes, please.
All right. Finding that mute button as I go. Thank you, Minister, for coming and speaking with us today and to talk about, I think, the importance of multilateralism. It has been good to hear about all of the work that you're doing. But one of the things that I wanted to talk with you today is about something that's been coming up in question period a lot, and that is our recent vote on Israel and actually on Palestine. I'm raising it because I'm Jewish and been to Israel a couple of times myself, strong supporter of Israel, and yet I'm concerned that there's been a bit of a perspective put out there that there's a unilateral Jewish point of view on this, instead of the fact that, in fact, it's a community that has many different points of views on things. And while our community might support Israel wholeheartedly and stand as an ally to Israel, and believe very much in the importance of Israel's peace and security, not true that everyone would oppose the position that Canada has taken on that vote. I just wanted to ask you some questions. I mean, my first one's pretty basic, but is this the same resolution essentially that our country supported in 2019?
Yes.
All right. And I just, as a matter of clarity, was this resolution supported by 163 other countries?
I believe so. You may have the count in front of you, Mrs. De Bruzen. I think it's about that out of memory. But I think just to to say and to add to what you said, I think the frame is that I think no one should question that Canada, and as you said, Canada has been a steadfast ally, and is and will be in front of Israel, in front of the Palestinian people. And Canada voted in support of this particular resolution as it addresses the core of the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And Canada strongly supports as you said, I think the international consensus of a two-state solution, so that both sides can have a secure and prosperous future. And in that, I think Canada made a principal vote. I have been in touch with Jewish communities across Canada. And, we have to remember that this particular resolution was to reaffirm the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. I have explained that to Jewish communities across Canada. I've been in touch with my my Israeli counterpart to explain Canada's position. And as a friend of, I think, as a friend of Israel, we all want a lasting peace, and we all want a two-state solution. So I think we've been able to explain that, and we will continue to be the steadfast ally that we have always been. And as every member of this committee know, overwhelmingly, Canada supports Israel, not just at the United Nations, but at all international organizations. And in my discussion with my counterpart, I can tell you we have many bilateral projects that we're pursuing. We talk almost every other week, or we exchange, because like I said, now you do diplomacy by text message. So we are probably as close as ever two Minister of Foreign Affairs have been between Canada and Israel, and we'll continue.
No, and that's great to hear, because I think it is important to have that strong relationship. I just wanted to also, though, go to a point, because when I hear some of the questions, it gives the impression that there's been a tremendous change, but the view that that Palestinians have a right of self-determination, and the two-state solution being the one that is the best for peace in the region, is that not the same Canadian policy that was under Prime Minister Harper formerly when he was Prime Minister Martin and Chrétien?
Sure, and I think you can be a steadfast ally, as Canada is, of Israel, and at the same time, reaffirm in a resolution the right of the Palestinian people for self-determination. I think that we all want a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East, and having a Palestinian state living side by side with Israel, that both people can live in security and dignity and safety. And I think that you will see Canada doing even more with Israel. And that's why when we explained that position, it was understood. And we will continue to be, as you mentioned, Mrs. de Brussen, the steadfast ally that Israel would expect from Canada, and that we have demonstrated time and time again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Mr. de Brussen. Maintenant, la parole est à Monsieur Bergeron pour...
And now, Mr. Bergeron, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the Minister once again. I think that we're all insisting upon pleading in favour of multilateralism. There have been a certain number of crises recently where the international community was directly involved or not. For example, the crisis in Karabakh. And I'd like to talk about a crisis that took place in Latin America, namely the election in Bolivia. According to the OAS, the election of Morales was tainted by irregularities, and this led to him being overthrown, and new elections came about, and his successor was elected the head of the party. And the MIT has carried out a study that calls into question what has been claimed by the OAS, and has drawn the conclusion that Mr. Morales did actually win the elections. So, how should I put it? Canada has endorsed the OAS comments in Bolivia, I believe, or has Canada been slightly reserved in this matter, in particular in the light of these results from the MIT study? Yes, I did intervene after the election, as you will have seen. Canada has closely followed this together with the Organization of American States and followed through on the verification, the audit mission, and we will continue to work with them. We are looking into this, Mr. Bergeron, and I'm happy that you have mentioned that, because it's true that we've seen democracy actually going backwards in various Latin American countries where we have very good relationships. So we'll certainly continue to closely follow that. We're busy analysing the audit report that has been presented, and we're going to tread carefully. I think you've used the right words on this. Yes, I think we need to tread carefully because we have the impression that a president that was democratically elected has been disposed of. And fortunately, it does seem that the new election brought to power the same party once more, but nevertheless, we have a president in exile in Argentina, and perhaps he should actually still be in power. Mr. Bergeron, I'm sorry. You will be able to perhaps come back later.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. How many minutes did you say?
2.5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask a few quick questions, Chair, and given the 2.5 minutes that's there, I understand that your Canada is going to spend additional monies on non-proliferation, arms control, and disarmament. However, I noted that we have not yet signed on to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was recently received the required 50 signatory and notifications to allow it to enter in force under international law. When will Canada join the international community in signing this treaty?
Well, thank you, Mr. Harris, for a very important question. As you know, Canada unequivocally supports global nuclear disarmament. We've been committed to the work that will take concrete steps toward a nuclear-free world. But like all of our NATO allies, Canada supports the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as the cornerstone of the international non-proliferation and disarmament architecture.
Well, that's a step in the right direction. However, this is a treaty that bans nuclear weapons, and I think that it's time for Canada to sign on. We also have seen that Canada, you mentioned in your remarks that we needed to support the most vulnerable people in the world populations with respect to the COVID-19 situation, and talked about Canada being a good friend of the Palestinian people. Is the government prepared to respond to the request by the desperate situation of the UNRWA, the United Nations Commission for Refugees in Palestine? They are in very desperate situation, unable to pay their employees, and need to be able to support the needs of medical assistance for Palestinians during this crisis. Is that something that your government is prepared to respond to, increasing our aid and dealing with the emergency now facing the Palestinian people?
Well,
just a brief answer, please, Minister.
Yeah, well, as you know, Canada is very committed to helping to meet the needs of the vulnerable Palestinian refugee. You probably recall, Mr. Harris, over 2016 and 19, we contributed 110 million of funding. And this is something I've been discussing with colleagues in the Middle East. And at the same time that we are supporting, we're also monitoring the work of UNRWA very closely and making sure that we exert enhanced due diligence. But I think this is very important work for stability and security in the Middle East, and that's something we're looking at this point.
Thank you, Minister. The next series is a 5-minute series. It goes to Mr. Genuis, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. About 25 Canadian children are in detention camps in northern Syria. Estimates are that 18 of those children are under 6 years of age. Why hasn't the Canadian government acted to repatriate those children?
Well, thank you, Mr. Genius, and I'm happy to see you. I missed you yesterday, I must say. It's good to see you. Well, you will have seen from news report, and obviously there's the Privacy Act. We were able to secure the return of one orphan in Canada. You remember at the time I said this was extraordinary. That was the only Canadian orphan that we had in the camp. and I think thankfully she has been reunited with her family. But that the type of logistics that we needed involving the Canadian Armed Forces was exceptional and extraordinary. We don't have, as you know, a diplomatic presence in Syria, and we have a duty of care to our employees. So that mission was very unique, but we are aware of the situation, and we always try to find out and inquire about their well-being.
Thank you, Minister. I think if you would understand that if those were my children or your children, neither of us would find that response to be good enough. It's not an issue of the Privacy Act. It's an issue of whether Canada is prepared to repatriate Canadian nationals who are under 6 years of age, who are in, to put it mildly, less than desirable conditions. You've demonstrated that your government is capable of repatriating children from those camps. You demonstrated it in the case of Amira. So I'll just ask the question again, because I don't think you answered it. There's still over 20 children there, many of whom are under 6 years of age. You were able to send in Canadian personnel to repatriate one child from those camps. So what about the other 24 children that are there?
Which are with their parents. That was the distinction. We had one orphan, and you will see, Mr. Genius, that the operation, and I cannot go in operational detail. We've said that.
Minister, I'm going to just jump in again because I'm looking for answers here. Can you just explain to me why it is easier? So I got a specific question for you. Why is it easier to repatriate?
Can I interrupt for a second? It's impossible for interpretation to follow if two members talk over top of each other. If I can just ask you, please, to separate questions and answers to the very best of your ability.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me sharpen my question and hear from the minister on this. So, Minister, you said that the difference was in one case it was an orphan, and in another case it was children with their parents. It would seem to me, though, that the rights of Canadian nationals are the same, and the logistics involved in repatriation are the same. And in many cases, our allies have repatriated in cases where children were with their parents. So why is the government of Canada not repatriating the remaining dozens of children, many of whom are under 6, who are in these camps?
You want me to answer now?
Please, yeah, I'd really like to know.
Okay. So what I said to you is that there was only one Canadian orphan which was in the camp. That's why we could mount a very extraordinary mission to be able to repatriate her safely, ensuring her safety and safe return home to her extended family. The circumstances and the operations that was possible to do that with one orphan obviously is different than what you're suggesting. Some other countries that you have referred to had a diplomatic presence. We do not have a diplomatic presence, as you know, in Syria, and our ability to provide consular assistance is obviously hindered by that fact. We have a duty of care to our employees, and what we did in this case was exceptional. We had one orphan and we brought her back. We should all be happy with that.
Minister, I was very happy to see Amira brought back, but I am not happy with the response in total. And your response, frankly, is just very confused. Like, are you telling me that there just wasn't enough room in the vehicle for adding a few other people? Is that the issue? Like, okay, sorry, there weren't enough seatbelts, so we only brought out one person. Like Canadian personnel went in, they were in the camps, they were engaging in diplomatic conversations with the people administering the camps, where there are 24 Canadian children, and you brought back one. And you're telling me there are operational difficulties in cases where the children have parents that don't exist as operational difficulties in cases where the child's an orphan? I think you can give a better explanation than that, Minister.
Well, the better explanation, Mr. Genius, is obviously you're not aware of the detail of the operation because you made a number of assertions that are just not accurate. And obviously what I said is that you're not aware how the mission was conducted. You're not aware what we did. You're not aware of the circumstances. You're not aware of.
But how in the world can it be about logistics? Like, Canadian forces were there. There are 24 children. Minister, if it was your children or my children, these are kids under 6. They're Canadian nationals under 6 in these camps, and you're baffling us with excuses.
Mr. Jennings, we'll have to leave it there. And let me just repeat the point, please, for future interaction, that it is absolutely impossible for interpretation to follow if members talk over top of each other. You've had your 5 minutes. We will now go to Ms. Sahota, please, for the next round of 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today.
Pleasure to see you.
It's a pleasure to see you as well. And like I was stating when we were doing our sound checks, you always bring a very positive vibe and good energy wherever you go. So I enjoy that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about something that won't come as a surprise to you. We got to probably know each other a little bit better over the repatriation mission that your department and other departments had to contribute in undertaking. So around the time you had just stated that you last appeared here March 12th, and it was the day before that that WHO had declared this current pandemic a pandemic, and it was soon after that that I started receiving a whole bunch of texts, calls, emails, and I couldn't believe the amount of volume of people that were stuck across the world that wanted to be back home with their families here. Can you describe a little bit? You talked about going from 10 people working in this Department of Repatriation to 600 people. I know the estimates that we're looking at right now are prior to all of this having been done, but maybe you can inform us a little bit about what it took to get the tens of thousands of Canadians repatriated that you had mentioned before. Go ahead, please, Minister.
Well, thank you for your kind words. I think I'll sum it up by leadership, and leadership expressed by all members of a diplomatic corps. I mean, this was really a truly extraordinary effort of coming together with the deputy, with everyone here in Ottawa, and the missions around the world. I mean, we were facing some unprecedented circumstances. We had airspace closure, airport closures, martial law being imposed, restriction on flights, restriction on cruise. I mean, this was like the perfect storm, if you want. We'd never experienced anything like this, where you have hundreds of thousands of people in about every country of the world. We were able to repatriate with facilitated flights north of 100,000. If I include the commercial flight, you go even bigger than that. We did about 500 flights from 110 countries. And really, I really want to give the credit for all of those amazing diplomats. I mean, people went way beyond the call of duty, working countless hours, responding. I think at some stage, it was something, like I said, around 1 million email and 2 million phone calls, or the other way around. I can just remember, I remember I was getting 600 text messages a day, and everyone here has been transformed to a consular officer to be able to respond to that. And that's why also we provided the loan, because we realized that there might be people which were stuck abroad for no fault of their own that needed financial assistance. And I'm happy that we gave about 5,000 of these loans. And you know what? We learned from that experience, and I want to compliment the Deputy Minister, Martha Morgan, and every officials that have been there. We really stepped up in a way that, you know, sometime when you face circumstances like that, you rise up to the challenge. And I think the team at Global Affairs everywhere in the world did rise up and did things, I must say, Mrs. Sahota, that no one ever expected. I can think of people in Peru. In some places, our missions are certainly not comprised of enough people to face the challenges. You know, we repatriated a lot of people from India, a lot of people from Peru, a lot of people from Morocco, a lot of people from Pakistan. And I think that we have been able to help hundreds of thousands of Canadians. And that's probably the thing I'm most proud of the team, which did extraordinary work. And also, you know, at the time where they were also concerned about their own families. And you remember, this was at the beginning when everyone was asking what's going on. They showed up for work every day, and they put the interests of Canadians and made sure that we could bring back these people home.
Well, I definitely like to compliment your team, your parliamentary secretary as well, and all of your staff, and of course the departmental workers that put in all those hard hours and efforts. 2 million emails is not easy to respond to, but it was a logistical challenge at the time. And I know for my riding, I had a lot of people that were stuck in India, and I was constantly messaging, emailing you and all of your staff about that. Can you give us a little bit more detail as to why there were so many people that were finding it challenging to come home from that part of the world?
Well, first of all, you said right, Rob Oliphant, who is part of your committee, did amazing work, as you did, Mrs. Sahota, because you were you were very much engaged to help your people in your riding. Why we had so many people? I think India was one of the places where we had a lot of people who were vacationing and ended up to be stranded with no fault of their own. I think we repatriated north of I don't have the exact number, but we're certainly tens of thousands of people from India. And overall, I think this operation went pretty well, and we could do that safely. And bring these people back home. But this is thanks also to all members of parliament. I want to say we did our part, members of parliament did their part, and Canadians bear with us at the time of difficulty, and we certainly learned from that. And
Minister, thank you very much. I'll have to cut you off there and go to the next one, but we can certainly circle back in the subsequent round. We are now going into round 3, and 5 minutes go to Mr. Morantz, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I wanted to talk to you about the resolution, the vote on the resolution in the UN last week as well. And I appreciate the attempt at what I would call damage control with respect to the conversation between you and Ms. DeBrusen earlier. But with the greatest of respect, it's not the part of the resolution that says that Canada supports a two-state solution that the Jewish community is concerned about. It's the rest of the resolution that is problematic. And in fact, your own ambassador, Mr. Ray, said that there were parts of the resolution that he simply did not agree with. Your own colleague, former colleague, Mr. Levitt, said that by supporting this resolution, Canada is providing ammunition to those who seek to delegitimize and demonize the state of Israel, which ultimately sets back the prospects for peace in the region. But the aspects of the resolution that are problematic, Minister, have to do with really 3 things. One is that it says that the security wall, which was put up to protect all Israeli citizens, Jewish and non-Jewish, from terrorist attacks, severely impedes the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. Your government voted for that. It says that the so-called occupied territory should be contiguous. In other words, that the West Bank and Gaza should be contiguous. If that were to come true, well, Israel simply would no longer exist. Your government voted for that. And it also refers to Israel as an occupier, which has never been the official position of the government of Canada. If your goal was simply to reaffirm Canada's commitment to a two-state solution, wouldn't it have been simpler simply to vote against this ill-conceived resolution and then just put out a press release saying why you voted against it and that you support, as always, a two-state solution?
Well, thank you, Mr. Morantz, for that question. You know, I have enormous respect for you and the questions. You know, you did ask me that question in the House, I think, on 1 or 2 occasions, and I think that our explanation of vote speaks for itself as well. And you're well familiar with that. I had a chance to speak to Jewish communities across Canada to explain our position. I also spoke to my counterpart in Israel, with whom we have an extraordinary collaboration. And I think that the Jewish community in Canada and around the world understand that Canada is a steadfast ally of Israel. You know well that we vote against the vast majority of these yearly Israel-related resolutions. We explained the reason that we made that vote, and we said that it reaffirmed the right of the Palestinian people for self-determination. And I will continue to engage with the community, with whom I have many, many friends, probably as many as you, and for whom I have enormous respect. And we explained that. Ambassador Ray did that. The Prime Minister did that. And I think it's not inconsistent with being a steadfast ally of Israel. And if you look at our voting records, I think you will realize that our government has a position on votes, which, if you look at previous government, is very much demonstrating that we are the steadfast ally that our friends in Israel expect from Canada.
Well, I don't disagree that Canada is and always should be an ally, but I would say that the vast majority, to respectfully disagree with Mr. Bruce, and the vast majority of Canadian Jews would not appreciate the fact that their government is voting for a resolution that refers to Israel in the preamble the way I described earlier. They just simply would not. And in fact, although you say you've consulted and talked to many members of the Jewish community, and I don't know if you've consulted with other people outside of the Jewish community who also feel very strongly about Canada's support for Israel, but that might be a good thing to do as well. But the reality is that 3 major organizations pled with you, B'nai B'rith, Simon Wiesenthal Center, CIJA, all pled with you to not vote for this resolution for the reasons that they very clearly and concisely described. If it is the position of the government of Canada that there should be 2 states living side by side peacefully, that is the point that you can make without voting for a resolution that calls Israel an occupier, supports contiguity of Palestinian regions, and calls the wall an impediment to self-determination. You didn't have to do that to make your point. That's not a question, it's just a statement. And I think it's really to set the record straight on really how Canadian Jews and millions of other Canadians who support Israel feel about what your government did this year and last year. And
Mr. Morans, thank you very much. We'll have to leave it there. Again, there's opportunity. There may well be in a subsequent round, Minister, yes. Okay. We will now go to Dr. Fry for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Minister. As always, good to see you too. Listen, I want to go back to something that Mr. Diot brought up, and this is about journalism and journalists. Since 1992, 1,350 journalists have been murdered around the world. 40% of those have come from the Caribbean, Latin American region. We also know that in the OSCE, there are many journalists right now who are being tortured, put into prison, their human rights denied. And these are all journalists who are actually being critical of governments. We see Turkey in the OSCE, we see Belarus in the OSCE, we see some of the Central Asian countries in the OSCE who are doing this. And I wondered, it is easy for us to decry it internationally, but that doesn't solve the problem. Are there tools that the international community can use to sanction, to do whatever they can about countries that are actually committing murder? And I mean, it's not just about democracy now, it's about human rights. It's a right of people to speak out and have opinions. It's a whole issue of the fact that people are afraid to do this now. I mean, I think very recently we saw in Mexico that a journalist, Ms. Farral, Senora Farral had been killed. So what are the tools that are available to us that can actually be effective? Because really just saying we don't like it and everyone waggling their finger has made absolutely no impression whatsoever. So are there tools?
Well, thank you for your question. And first of all, let me say, Ms. Fry, I just want to commend your work at the OSCE. Before I went there, I just want to state for the record, you were extremely helpful. And to your point, it's true that we see democracy and the value process in institutions and freedom of speech and freedom of expression in a way a number of authoritarian regimes which have used COVID-19 as an excuse. And let me take an example in Belarus. You know that at the Media Freedom Conference, there's a prize that was created by Canada and the United Kingdom to recognize journalists who did exceptional work. And this year, the prize has been awarded to the Belarusian Association of Journalists. Well, it's one way, I think, giving them a voice so that the international community with the high-level panel, I spoke to Amal Clooney, with Lord Neuberger, a number, and we have our own Erwin Cutler, which is on the high legal panel, to see how we can best protect journalists. He talked about enhancing consular assistance to journalists. There's a number of streams, and I spoke at the International Bar Association as well to raise the awareness of the plight which is being felt now by journalists. I mean, with the rise of authoritarianism that we see in many places of the world, we see freedoms going down. And those who are suffering on the front line have been journalists. And in too many parts of the world. And certainly we're always looking at the toolbox. I think what I like about the high-level legal panel in particular is that they are really looking at legal tools that states could draw upon to make sure that we can better protect journalists around the world.
Thank you. I think the minister, that at least tells us that we're working on some actually effective ways of dealing with this issue. I just didn't know if sanctions and things like, I mean, obviously you cannot apply Magnitsky because nobody is taking money and putting it into foreign accounts, so especially into Canada. But I think the most important thing that I wanted to talk about was that it's not just journalists. We are now seeing that parliamentarians are being murdered in many countries, and these are so-called, and I use the word guardedly, so-called democratic countries that belong to democratic institutions that are part of people that we deal with on an everyday basis. And again, I just wonder what we can do to protect parliamentarians as well.
Well, and I know you did a lot of work on that, and I want to first of all commend you again for the work you're doing on that with other parliamentarians around the world. It is of much concern. When we see an attack on freedom and democracy, it has many many concerning angle, and we've seen it in many countries where, I take the case of Belarus where you see that we have not recognized the presidential election as being free and fair. We've seen a number of issues coming up in Latin America. I think as parliamentarians, we should all be very, very concerned about what's going on, and just an idea about studies about the tools that you could recommend the international community in Canada can be part of that, part of the solution in addressing the situation you're talking with respect to different parliaments around the world.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fry. Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you.
We will move on. La parole est à Monsieur Bergeron, encore une fois.
Mr. Bergeron, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Well, I think that, well, I had a line of questions, but with the Morans actually really struck me. I think that we truly need to be of very bad faith to pretend that Canada actually took an anti-Israel position. I believe that all here we are used to the fact that we are being presented with bills, and formerly they were mammoth bills where there were several clauses we might have agreed with or not, and that was even the case under the former Conservative government of Stephen Harper. Some we were in agreement with, others we disagreed with. And in the end, we had to make a decision that could be interpreted by some for being, the position on all the elements of the bill. And we're also used, with some motions that come from the Conservative Party, where there are many things, some we agree with, others we don't agree with. But in the end, we need to vote either for or against. So what I see here is that Canada has voted in favor of the two-state solution, which indeed is the solution that will allow the establishment of a sustainable peace that will benefit Palestinians, but also benefit Israel. Of course, we can disagree, for example, with the fact that the motion was referring to contiguous territory. Of course, we could hope in an ideal world that both territories be contiguous. However, the geographic reality is just so that it's not the case. So when the ambassador appeared in this committee, when you said, when I had some reservations with regard to this resolution, I did that on behalf of the Canadian government. So the reservations were not expressed only by Bob Rae, citizen or even ambassador, but by the Canadian government. So with regard to the fact that Israel illegally occupies territory, well, that's the case. And this is what the international community refuses to recognize since 1967. So we might put our heads in the sand and pretend that Israel is not an occupying state. Israel occupies a territory that is not its own. And the international community does not recognize that. The United States, well, I would say, had a different position in moving their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, while the international community maintains their diplomatic missions in Tel Aviv to signify that the issue of Jerusalem is not solved yet. As long as we won't find a two-state solution, we will not be able to have a lasting peace that might benefit all parties. So, Minister, I would like to support you in the decision that you made, because I don't believe that this was a decision that went against Israel. I believe that, of course, there were some elements we might not be in agreement with in the resolution, and I think you were clear with regard to these positions. However, I believe that this was a responsible position in favor of peace and for Palestine as well as for Israel.
Thank you very much. Mr. Minister, I'm sorry, we are quite short on time here, 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Harris, please, also for 2.5 minutes only.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to follow up on my colleague, Mr. Bergeron's comments to say, since this issue has been discussed here broadly, that there are many Canadians, including Jewish Canadians, who believe that in human rights and who seek substantial peace and sustainable peace and justice in the Middle East are heartened by the support of Canada on the self-determination resolution. Notwithstanding, the preamble to many resolutions is not something that we always agree upon. The resolution itself supporting the self-determination is one that's an important step for Canada to take on the international stage, and would like to think that this is a step towards Canada being more engaged in trying to get closer to that two-state solution. It's not enough to say we support it. We've been saying that for many, many years, as has been pointed out by Mrs. Jabusin. What actually is Canada prepared to do, and what steps is Canada prepared to take to advance the cause of the two-state solution? We've asked already about support for the United Nations Relief and Workers Agency for Palestinian refugees to help them sustain their lives. We need self-determination. We need to have basics first. Can we do that? Can we do other things?
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Harris. And this is something I've been discussing with my Israeli counterpart, where he asked for Canada to play a positive role. And obviously, we are willing to play a meaningful role. I spoke to him, and we had a conversation not too long ago following the Abraham Accords. You may know that on the night of the Abraham Accords, I think I was the first foreign minister to whom he spoke to that night when they signed with the United Arab Emirates. So we are looking, we already have a free trade agreement, which we have enhanced with Israel. We're looking at ways at which, and I've been speaking with the Palestinian Authority as well. As you know, one of the good thing over the last 9 months, I've been able to speak. I spoke with the Secretary General of the Arab League also on a number of occasions. So we're looking, and to my Israeli colleague who have been asking me in particular to play a positive role, we always answer yes, and conveying sometime being Canada being able to speak to both sides. There are things that we are seeing and that I think we can play a positive role, and we'll continue to do so.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister.
To Mr. Chung.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I'd like to ask you a few questions about Nagorno-Karabakh. And in particular, I'd like to ask you about the conversation the Prime Minister had with President Erdogan on April 23rd. There was a report that indicated the Prime Minister committed to addressing Turkish concerns about the suspension of Canadian arms exports. Is that report accurate?
I'm not privy to the discussion between the Prime Minister and Minister Erdogan, but I think there is a readout, and the readout speaks for itself.
Okay. You approved these arms exports to Turkey. Why?
Well, let me just frame the discussion on that, Mr. Chung. As you know, Canada, under your government and all previous government, have been exporting equipment to NATO countries. Canada, as one of the most robust export control regime in the world, under our government, we signed the Arms Trade Treaty. And I must say to Canadians who are watching, sadly, you voted against that, where we enhanced our export control regime. And what I would say to the export that you're referring to, I look at them on a case-by-case basis, as the law requires me to do, is to look at all export permit requests on a case-by-case basis.
I guess, Minister, what's so confounding about your approval of these exports is that last year in October, in the fall, in September, October, your government suspended arms exports to Turkey. That was reversed in the spring when you allowed Canadian drone systems made by Westcam Industries of Burlington, Ontario, to export these drone systems for the BAYKAR drone, and then subsequently you resuspended arms exports. So that's why I asked the question. You know, high-tech drones are the reason why Azerbaijan defeated Armenia. There is no doubt that drones shifted the balance of power and made a huge difference in the conflict. The Canadian drone systems used in the South Caucasus by Azerbaijan were instrumental in Azerbaijan defeating Armenia. And it was your government, you in particular, Minister, that approved the export of Canadian drone systems. Minister, you said recently that Canada supports the Armenian people during this most difficult time. But what's confounding is how can you say on the one hand that you're supporting the Armenian people when you approved the export of these drone systems that were so instrumental in Azerbaijan defeating Armenia?
Well, let me be very clear to you and the Canadians, Mr. Chong. First of all, you're talking about cameras that were exported. That's the Canadian equipment that you're referring to, I suppose. With respect to that, and to show that our export control regime works, Mr. Chong, as you know, the moment that I was made aware that the end-use certificate was violated and the allegations that were made, I immediately suspended the relevant permits. And I think the steps that have been taken by Canada have been applauded even by the Prime Minister of Armenia. You probably saw his public statement that says he welcomed Canada's suspension and he wished other countries would follow suit. When I said that I was talking with Armenia, I've been in contact with the minister almost every day during the conflict. I've been talking to the Secretary General of the United Nations. I spoke to the Secretary General of NATO. I spoke to the leadership of the OSCE. I spoke to my colleagues in Europe to see what we can do more. But I think with respect to the export control regime, as you know it well, Mr. Chong, it is important to say that under the law, I am required to look at permits when they come to me, and I look at them on a case-by-case basis with the evidence that is presented to me. And when there's a violation, and the good thing with the Arms Trade Treaty, we should all be happy, you and all the members, is that Foreign Affairs Minister currently and in the future are bound now by a much higher standard, which as a lawyer, I commit to uphold not only the spirit, but the letter of the law.
Thank you, Minister. I just have a comment before my time is up. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left?
You have about a minute and a half.
Okay, thank you. You know, it was clear in your testimony yesterday in front of the Canada-China Committee that the government has already adopted a new framework for dealing with China, and there will be no formal release of this framework. I've been following this file closely since September, and I have to tell you, Minister, with respect, that I couldn't tell that there was a new framework that had already been put in place, and neither could many people who follow this file. I'd noted a change in rhetoric in October, but it seems to me the new framework is somewhat contradictory. You know, in September, when supposedly the new framework had been in place, you indicated you were no longer pursuing free trade talks with China, but Ambassador Barton said on the same day that to an audience in Edmonton, which included the Chinese ambassador to Canada, that Canada needs to do more in China and that we need to broaden trade with China. You know, the other thing that seems confounding about this new framework is I don't understand how any new framework cannot include a plan to deal with China's foreign influence operations here, nor do I understand how any new framework does not include a plan to make a decision on Huawei. So, Minister, you know, the new framework, I think, needs some more work because if I don't understand it, I can tell you the Chinese certainly will not understand it. I think it needs to be a lot clearer and a lot more consistent if Canada is going to have a clear, consistent voice with respect to China on the world stage.
Just a very brief answer, please, Minister, and there may be a chance to circle back.
Well, like I said, China of 2020 is not China of 2016 or even 2018, Mr. Chair. I think what I said is that, Mr. Chong, you've seen our position evolve in light of the situation. And I think we've been smart and firm in our position. I said that in the House today, whether it comes to the Uyghur, whether it comes to Hong Kong. I've outlined places where we're going to challenge China, places where we're going to, for example, coexist with China, some other areas where we're going to cooperate, for example, with respect to climate change. I said what will be driving us are principles. I said interest, principle, values, human rights, and then obviously some rules and partnerships. I think this has been laying out, and this is foreign policy in action. And I'll be happy to explain it to you further, but I can say that Canadians have seen it in action because we've taken very strong position on all these issues.
Thank you very much, Minister. Our final round, our final set in this round goes to Mr. Fonseca. Please, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister. And I feel that you've been very clear with our position on China, and also with what I'm going to ask you about Belarus. On November 5th, 2020, an independent expert report on Belarus was prepared under the auspices of the OSCE, and I want to thank the Honourable Hedy Fry for all her hard work there on the OSCE on behalf of Canada. Thank you, Hedy. But in that report, they found that on the 9th of August, 2020, the presidential elections were not transparent, free, or fair, and that they've been beyond any doubt major human rights abuses carried out by the Belarusian state against its own people. Minister, what impact, if any, might this report have on the international community's response to the events unfolding in Belarus?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Fonseca, for the question. And as you know, we've been at the forefront of the response. I mean, we've been issuing statements condemning the situation, calling it for what it is with the United Kingdom and other partners around the world, with I think the European Union. We have done 3 sets of sanctions when it comes to Belarus, the latest one with the European Union. And we will continue to do that because we think that it's really about sending a very clear and loud message that the international community is not going to stay idle. You may recall that I was, again, one of the first foreign ministers to get in touch with the leader of the democratic movement, Svetlana Tverskaya. We've been remaining in touch since then. I've been visiting her last time in a summit that I organized in the Baltics with all the Baltics foreign ministers. We have looked at ways how we can support the democratic movement. And I think that her and the brave women that we have seen facing a very authoritarian regime, I think Canadians should be proud to see that their government is there standing up with these brave women that have been facing an authoritarian regime. And we will continue, obviously, to fight for freedom and for free and fair election in Belarus.
Minister, it's heartening to see that there's action to these reports. I want to ask you, the government of Canada is making a $6.6 million contribution to the World Trade Organization, WTO, in 2021. In 2020, Canada was at 2.5% contributor to the WTO. How's Canada ranked as a member contributor to the WTO, and what voice does Canada have at the table?
Well, I may leave that to the deputy for the exact number of contribution. She may have that. But what I say is that look at the Ottawa Group. This is a creation of Canada, where we, at a time where leadership was needed at the WTO, when, as you know, the appellate function was put in questions, where was undermining the very foundation of the WTO, Canada took action. And this is a bit like the foreign minister COVID group that I created. This was of the moment. We led and we provided leadership, which I think the Ottawa Group has done great things with respect to supply chain. And with respect to your specific question, I'm happy to cede the floor to the deputy, or otherwise to come back to you with a written answer on the specific amount of funding. Deputy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have those numbers at my fingertips, but we'd be glad to get them back to the committee after this.
Okay, well, thank you. And so, Minister, just another question that comes to numbers again. At the Women's Deliver Conference in June 2019, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that the Government of Canada will raise its funding to reach an average of $1.4 billion annually by 2023 to support women, children, and adolescents' health around the world, with $700 million going specifically to sexual and reproductive health and rights until 2030. Minister, is Canada on track to upholding this commitment? And maybe the deputy may have some of those numbers.
Well, definitely. And I think this is Canada playing a leadership role in the world. We've said it before, and I think questions from the member have highlighted that we know that the COVID crisis has impacted disproportionately women and girls around the world. that we need to do more to support them, to make sure that they be fully at the table. We know that once you have more diversity at the table, more women at the table, peace is more sustainable. And we need to continue to be there for economic security. We're doing that at the UN. We're doing that through a number of agencies. And I think that's what Canadians would expect from their government.
Thank you.
Minister, thank you very much. Mr. Fonseca, thank you. I want to thank all colleagues, Minister Champagne included, for respecting the time limits. As a result of our discipline, we have an additional 12 or 13 minutes before we need to come to a hard stop. I propose to divide that time evenly across parties to give every party an additional chance to ask one pithy 2.5-minute question and answer in the sequence of Mr. Genuis, Ms. Abruzzen, Monsieur Bergeron, and Mr. Harris. I would give the floor to Mr. Genuis, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I was just so struck by your comment that the military technology that Canada sold to Turkey that gave Azerbaijan a decisive military advantage over Armenia, that was just cameras. To me, it's like saying that a bullet is just a piece of metal. I mean, the nature of a thing is in its use, and the use in this case was critical technology that gave Turkey a decisive advantage. So it doesn't matter if it's a piece of metal or a camera or what it is. What matters is its use. And the flippant way in which you, a minister of the Crown, refer to that, I think would be quite surprising to people whose lives were directly affected by this conflict. Minister, you've responded to that before, and I would maybe invite further comments on that in writing, but I want to ask you a specific question about your policy with respect to Iran. We all recognize, I think, the importance of democratic norms and adhering to votes that take place in the House of Commons. 2.5 years ago, you voted to immediately list the IRGC as a terrorist entity under the Criminal Code. Will your government follow the will of the House of Commons and list the IRGC as a terrorist entity under the Criminal Code, as you voted to do 2.5 years ago?
So, Mr. Chair, let me refer first to the question or the comment that was made by the member. I won't let the record stand for what he said. There's nobody, and look at me, Mr. Genius, I have been more engaged on the file of Nagorno-Karabakh than you probably have been.
Minister, your comments spoke for themselves. I'd like a response on the Iran question, please. I have 2.5 minutes.
Can I just remind you, Mr. Generous, of the point that we made earlier, which is to please not have members talk
Mr. Chair, that is fair, but it is the time that. But it is my time to manage, and I'd ask the minister a question on Iran.
Mr. Generous, I've hit the pause button. Just as a point of order, it's impossible for interpretation to follow when members talk over top of each other. Please, just a reminder.
Minister on Iran, please.
So to continue my answer, and that's what I wanted to say. What I was specific is that I want to set the record straight about what the equipment, and you had official would testify. So if you want to be truthful to Canadians, you have to call things, and you have to be respecting the record. You had officials which testify and provided you all the answers, and I'm happy to do that. I am very concerned, and Mr. Genius, that's why you should recognize that the moment that allegations were made, that the equipment, that the technology that was used in the drone, I immediately suspended the relevant permits. They remain frozen, and I launched an investigation. That's the responsible thing to do, and I will take no lessons for someone when it comes to having been there for.
Thank you, Minister. The record is clear. IRGC, yes or no? Will you list the IRGC?
That is your time. Thank you very much. We will have to go to
the minister.
Mr.
Didn't
now
want to
for
answer.
The next 2.5 minutes, please, Mr. Abruzzen.
Thank you, Minister. So at the beginning, you talked a bit about pulling out your Rolodex and pulling together foreign ministers from around the world to address the challenges that were posed by COVID. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about what were some of the main successes you saw of bringing those people together? You said up to about 20, I believe.
Yeah, well, first of all, it was at the moment where the world needed it. That was a moment where the COVID crisis just hit, that we needed to come together as the international community. And I simply, and I want to say, thanks God, I had a chance to collect some of these numbers before the COVID crisis hit, because these numbers were very useful to me when we wanted to repatriate Canadians. We want to bring people home. And that COVID Foreign Minister Committee was really to bring best practices, to bring ideas, to to have a chance to see what's going on. And we knew, like, for example, we learned a good thing from South Korea, from Singapore. We were hearing, as you know, because the COVID crisis hit them before, just like in Italy. So we could share best practices. We could work together at, for example, like say air bridges, where we could work together in establishing the supply chain, in making sure that there would be transit. You remember when we're trying to repatriate people, we say if everyone is closing the airports and the border, there's going to be nowhere where we can repatriate our citizens. So we've been working together, and we've been continuing to engage. I think now it's the 13th time we have had these discussions among foreign ministers. And this is really Canada leading at a time of the moment. When leadership was needed, we raised up to the challenge and we created the group.
Well, thank you for that. And I guess I only have another 30 seconds, so not much time. But with that, you said 13 times. Do you expect that you will continue meeting? Is this another avenue to continue those conversations going forward as we move forward?
Well, I believe so. I hope so. I have been engaging with my partners around the world, and I suggested that committee continues because there's so much coordination. It's a group which brings people from Latin America, from the Middle East, from Europe, from Asia, and the type of countries who want to work together, put politics aside, and make sure that we can advance some of these issues which are critical to provide stability and address the biggest challenge we have, which is COVID right now.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. Merci, Madame de...
Thank you very much, Minister and Mr. de Brezon. Now, Mr. Bergeron, I would like to quickly come back to the line of question put forward by Mr. Junius about the children that are stuck in the refugee camps in Syria. Minister, you have mentioned the fact that we don't have anyone on the ground so that we would be able to carry out this operation, but we've seen that you were able to do this in spite of everything. So I'd just like to underline that, because you said that one of the aggravating factors was the fact that we don't have any personnel on the ground, whereas several Western countries that repatriated children from these refugee camps are exactly in the same situation as Canada. So I don't think that we can say that this is truly an argument that justifies the fact that we're leaving children in this hellish situation. And then I'd like to draw a parallel with the situation that has come up in Nagorno-Karabakh. I believe that Canada was at a disadvantage because it didn't have any representation on the spot. Now, we haven't been able to help Armenia concretely during the crisis, but do you think you're going to set up an embassy there? Well, we're always trying to see how we can have a presence. Now, Mr. Bergeron, I have had many exchanges with the Armenian government and with the community, so that you'll understand that we're very much aware of what was happening on the ground every day during this crisis, because I got a text message virtually each day about the situation on the ground, so that we were able to discuss this with my counterparts. I'd just like to say, Minister, that it's your own officials that told us that it was difficult for them to get information as to what was truly happening on the ground. So either they didn't give us the right information, your officials, or else this really did translate what was actually happening. Well, I had that information as Foreign Affairs Minister, but we didn't have them. I had these discussions with my counterpart, said the Minister. But to come back to your question, we're always looking into this, because with the Armenian people, we share democratic values, French-speaking values and shared values. And that is why from the outset, when the ceasefire occurred, we said that we need to go back to the co-chairmanship of the Minsk group and see whether this agreement will allow for lasting peace. And that's where Canada is going to continue to participate. I'm very much committed to this, as is the Government of Canada, because we've all been very much touched by what's happened to the Armenian people. That is why we want and we shall continue to be committed to this. Thank you very much.
Mr. Harris, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Minister, Canada contributes $11.1 million to the International Criminal Court. In March, Amnesty International questioned a letter that Canada sent to the ICC in February 14, 2020, which they say reiterated Canada's position that the court doesn't have jurisdiction to investigate alleged war crimes in Palestine, but also reminded the court of Canada's budgetary contributions, which Amnesty interpreted as it appears to be a threat for Canada to withdraw financial support. A serious accusation which deserves a response by you and your government. Does such a letter exist? Will you release it to the committee? And does it in fact remind the court of Canada's contribution?
Mr. Harris, I've responded to that question on a number of occasions. I'm not aware of any such letter. And what we said is in the absence of a Palestinian state, it is Canada's view that the court does not have jurisdiction in this matter under international law. And obviously, we don't link that to any contribution. This is just a statement we made, and I'm not aware of any such letter.
Well, thank you for that denial on the record, because we haven't been able to get that specific from you and your office, despite my letters to you. But thank you for that today. Canada's contribution to the World Health Organization has decreased since 2018 each year. The United States has pulled back. You have questioned the financing of the WHO. We're going to look at it to see if it's doing the right thing. Is it not important that Canada perhaps increase its contribution to the WHO? Experts say will there be more pandemics as we go forward? What do you say about that? Isn't that Canada's role to fix institutions if they need fixing and make them work?
Well, certainly, and I think you will see, Mr. Harris, from the estimates that we have, to the best of my recollection, we have increased our funding. And certainly, I've said that we want to make sure, well, if you're saying that, then I'll leave it to the deputy perhaps to provide elements of response, because I recall there was a separate call made by the World Health Organization, and that Canada was responding to that. And I can say we did that with the Red Cross, we did that in Latin America, we did that in Africa, we did that in the Caribbean in many ways to help during this COVID crisis, because like you, I believe that Canada should stand with people around the world who are facing significant hardship from this COVID crisis.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Colleagues, that brings us to the end of our scheduled time with our Minister of Foreign Affairs. Monsieur le Ministre, merci beaucoup de votre...
Thank you very much, Minister, for your testimony this afternoon. Thank you for your service and also the service of your team.
We had a fulsome discussion. I propose that we let you and your team disconnect, and then we will turn our minds expediently to the votes that we need to complete tonight.
Well, thank you very much. Merci à tout le monde de m'avoir invité.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
On behalf of Canadians, it's really appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. And Madam Clerk, as the Minister and his team disconnect, we have a couple of options with respect to the votes that need to follow, the main estimates. The proposal is, one proposal is that we can take them all at once, and the committee votes with avec diffidence on division as one package, or we can go through them one by one. I'm in the committee's hands. In the interest of time, maybe if there's no objection, we can just treat them all as one package. And Madam Clerk, I would then be in your hands with respect to the appropriate language that I need to put to the committee. Any views from colleagues on this? Monsieur Bergeron, oui?
Monsieur le Président,
Yes, I believe that we should adopt these as a package on division. Does everyone agree?
Okay, I then put to the committee that we pass the votes that were read out at the beginning of this meeting on division in their entirety. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, the votes carry. And with that, Madam Clerk, I think we are done for today. We stand adjourned until our next meeting on Thursday. Wait, yes?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the votes carried on division.
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Did I misspeak?
Oh, you just simply said the votes carried.
On division, yes, understood. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chong, for clarifying. On division, and we are adjourned until Thursday's meeting. And thank you for being disciplined again on time this afternoon.